be difficult for personal computers to do more than one thing at a time. Starting with Windows 95, it's easy. Start multitasking. Start Windows 95.
Hey there Retro Games fans, this is Andy C from Piece of 8-Bit. Welcome to this week's video. Welcome to the beginning of October, which can only mean one thing. If you watch my channel, you'll know that it is the end of another month with. Month with is where I live with a particular thing, usually a console, for a month. In this particular instance, it's a piece of software, and that piece of software is Windows 95. I have been living with it for the last 4 weeks, and it is my duty in this video to come back and tell you what it has been like, whether you should go back and have another look at it yourself. I'll tell you a little bit about it, a bit of history, a little bit of some of the specs that you needed to run Windows 95, some of the games that I've been playing, and I will ultimately, as I say, tell you how to get back into it, and if you should get back into it. Yes, it has been an interesting month, and all of that will be revealed throughout this video. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I will be revealing what next month's, or well, this month, October's month with will be. And it is a console, and there are some clues around. Yeah, I will reveal all at the end on that one. So, without any further ado, let's get right into a little bit of the background and history of Windows 95 and how it came to be. And yeah, let's start there. I'll see you on the other side. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the history of Windows 95 and its impact. So, Windows 95 was codenamed Chicago. Development started in 1992, shortly after the release of Windows 3.1. And the vision was really to create something that was much more accessible to the masses and a true 32-bit operating system. So Windows had a full 32-bit kernel that was capable of sort of preemptive multitasking. So a really strong vision for what they wanted, and that's ultimately what delivered. It came out in 24th of August, on the 24th of August 1995, and it cost $209.95, which is about, I think about £140 maybe. And the upgrade version was $109.95, which was about £90 in pounds. And just to give you some kind of context, in money today, that would be around $525 for the full version of Windows 95, which is really into kind of smartphone territory these days. So it was a really expensive thing to buy, bearing in mind now that a lot of operating system upgrades are quite often free. But it was a huge success nonetheless. It sold 7 million copies within the first 5 weeks, and it was a real cultural moment for PCs, where PCs went from being a business tool to something that was for the masses, for people who wanted to game or have in their home, and PCs just became completely mainstream at that point. It also introduced the concept of the internet to a lot of people. Obviously in that first version we didn't see Internet Explorer, but certainly in follow-up versions, and also in that Plus version that came out at the same around just shortly after, you got Internet Explorer 1, and then we saw it support Internet Explorer versions all the way through to 5 later on. It was a huge launch. Around £200 million, some have said even up to $300 million. $200 million up to $300 million was spent, and they had some big celebrity names in there, such as Jay Leno. They had Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry doing their training video for it, and they paid $3 million just for the rights to the "Start Me Up" song from the Rolling Stones. So it was huge, and as well as all of those other things, you know, internet and everything else, it also brought some real big technical improvements as well. It was bringing in something called plug and play, which allowed you to basically, for any device that supported it, plug a card into your PC, it would just work. DirectX, which allowed games to, essentially, it was like an interface for games where basically the games would interact with DirectX. DirectX would work with Windows, so you didn't have to fiddle about with different hardware setups or configurations. Games would just work by using DirectX. It sort of normalised things. And whilst the early versions of DirectX were a little bit flaky, as indeed the early versions of Plug and Play were, they really did sort of set the scene for what was to come really over the next 30 years, let alone the next few years of Windows 95. So I mentioned that it was obviously a 32-bit kernel, but it also brought some other things as well that were also real good quality of life improvements. So the concept of long file names, very, very limited in DOS, obviously. We had File Explorer for navigating around our file structures and disks and all that kind of thing, which was really convenient. We had, and of course, we had the Start menu, which made that navigation much, much easier than the Program Manager that you used to get in Windows 3.1. So some really big improvements. It was a massive step change over Windows 3.1, which was also very, very popular. A lot of people had Windows 3.1. It still had some of that familiarity. So if you were coming from 3.1 and you went to Windows 95, you would still recognize a lot of the terminology and you would recognize the icons and the general sort of look and feel of the operating system. But you could also come to it new and learn Windows 95 and learn how to use a PC from scratch. And it was very, very intuitive for that moment. I think it's fairly safe to say that Microsoft's vision for what they wanted Windows 95 to actually be right back early in 1992 did come to be reality. And really, that DNA of Windows 95 is what we see in operating systems for years to come. And even back then, you know, there was 3 more operating systems. Windows 95 was what was called the Win9X series of Windows, which were basically still DOS-based operating systems. So it still had MS-DOS 7 and 7.1 running underneath Windows 95, but pretty seamlessly in the background. And we had 3 more versions of Windows based on that before the DOS-based operating systems were retired in favour of NT-based operating systems, which includes today's operating systems, of course, right the way back to NT, Windows 2000, Windows XP. So there you go. That's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour then of the history of Windows 95 and how it came to be. Let's now go and have a look at a little bit at the hardware required to run it. Okay, so let's talk hardware then. So when I do a console, it's nice and easy because ultimately the console will pretty much stay the same throughout its generation, bar a few little tweaks here and there. The processor, the architecture, the amount of memory, those kind of things, they might vary a little from here to there, but ultimately you could talk about maybe 1 or 2 model variants and that would be it. When you talk about Windows 95, it's a little bit more complicated because Windows 95 is a piece of software for one. And secondly, Windows 95 could run on an infinite amount of configurations of PCs. So something like macOS, for instance, it's nice and easy for Apple. They make the hardware and they make the software, so they can optimize the operating system to work perfectly on an Apple machine. And you don't have to worry about the fact that someone might have a weird and wonderful graphics card or a weird and wonderful sound card or whatever kind of odd configuration that they've got. Windows 95 didn't have that luxury, and in fact, Windows in general doesn't have that luxury. And so it's a little bit harder for Microsoft, really. And obviously with the introduction of things like DirectX and more importantly, Plug and Play, where Microsoft are saying you can plug a card in, and if it's Plug and Play compatible, we'll figure it out and we'll put a driver in and it will just work with Windows. That makes Windows 95 hardware specs quite complicated. It also makes the operating system have to support a whole raft of different setups, sometimes with unusual results. But what I'm going to do is just talk through a little bit about some of the minimum and recommended specifications that you needed to get Windows 95 running, which will frame a little bit of some of that complexity, but also give you an idea about just how much of a generational gap of machines Windows actually had to support back in the day. So to start with, when Windows launched, ultimately it was still supported on a 386. Now I didn't know this until I did my research. It was supported on a 386 because Microsoft wanted Windows 95 to be rolled out to as many people as they possibly could, and a lot of people still had 386s back then. You needed a 386DX, which was perhaps the slightly more advanced 386, the more expensive version of the processor. You could run it with 4 meg of RAM, which is actually quite low. 50 to 55 megabytes of hard drive space was all you needed, and probably an SVGA card that supported 256 colours. Although it would run on 640 by 480 with 16 colours, but it would be pretty unpleasant to use, I should think. Now, it wasn't without its problems on that minimum spec, and that was a very, very, very minimum spec. It would run quite slowly. There were issues with the fact that although the 386 itself was a 32-bit processor, it still had a 16-bit external bus, which meant that it caused a number of problems. Windows 95 really wanted to be a full-blown 32-bit operating system. So whilst it was a minimum spec to run on a 386, generally that was a pretty bad idea. So the sort of general considered minimum spec, the sort of recommended spec, if you like, which is sort of somewhere in the middle, was a 486 running with 8 meg of memory. And really to properly get, in this first edition of Windows 95, to really have a good experience, it suggested running a 486 DX33 with 16 megabytes of memory, and that would give you a much rounder experience. Now, actually, for a lot of people, generally speaking, the Pentium was the place to go. Certainly for later versions of Windows 95, Pentium was already out by then, and in fact, by the end of the Windows 95 generation, a lot of people had things like Pentium 2s, which they were running, which actually initially, in some of the earlier versions of Windows, there was something called MMX in the Pentium 2 world, which Windows 95 didn't actually sort of support very well. It was a bit buggy, but as Windows progressed, you got better and better support for things like that. So that was those were sort of the minimum specs that you needed for Windows 95, and there were quite a few releases. In version 1, for instance, there was a lot of things that weren't supported. So there was no Internet Explorer. You could buy the Plus version of Windows, which included Internet Explorer 1. You didn't get USB support. TCP/IP support was somewhat limited, I think, but maybe even non-existent, I think, in that first version. It didn't support FAT32. It didn't have the MMX support. It didn't have the AGP, which is the the accelerated graphics port. Didn't have support for that either. So it was quite limited, actually. There was a Plus version, which came with a whole bunch of things like, theming and other screensavers and stuff like that, but it also brought IE1 with it. And then it wasn't until the service release 1, so OSR 1, that we actually started to see better versions of IE appearing. So we got IE2. That was really all there was in OSR 1. It wasn't until OSR 2 that things really started to get better. So we had pretty much all of the, we had IE at this point. So IE3 appeared. We had AGP support. DirectX 2 made an appearance at this point. The only thing that really didn't come at that point was USB support, which was still very, very new at that point. And to be honest with you, the definitive version of Windows 95 was essentially OSR 2.5, which supported, which had IE4, which was really, for me, probably the most viable version of IE, and that's when IE really started to kind of replace essentially the likes of Netscape as the dominant browser technology at the time. Not a browser I think it was necessarily better than, but certainly Microsoft were very aggressively pushing the whole browser thing at this point. IE4 was free, which, unlike Netscape, which you had to pay for, meant that it was a much more attractive proposition for many people. And if you've got OSR 2.5 with your Windows, your Windows 95 version, you were getting IE out of the box, which was incredible. And then in the last version of Windows 95 was released in 2001, last update, and that actually had IE5 support, Windows Media Player 7, DirectX 8, and it was also the final version of Office, which came out at the same time to be supported on Windows 95. So quite a big gap between that very early version, which didn't have any kind of support for very much at all, through to the last version, the last sort of big version, OSR 2.5, which was a much more rounded version of Windows. So if you're going to go back into Windows, it's that OSR 2.5 version that you're going to want to look for. You're going to get the best experience of Windows 95 from that there. But yes, interesting that it goes all the way back to the humble 386. But I think, most people, certainly for me, when I got Windows 95, I was running it on an AMD K6, which was equivalent to essentially a Pentium 2. I didn't have Windows 95 for a long time before I moved to 98. I think only a couple of years, maybe a year or two. But most people were running Windows 95, I think, on sort of higher end spec machines. I don't know anybody that was running it on a 386, certainly that was having a good time with it, that's for sure. So there you go, that's a little bit about the sort of the hardware, recommended specs, all those kind of things. Let's go on and talk now a little bit about some of the games that I've been playing on Windows 95 throughout September. Okay, so the games then. What have I been playing? Now, for those of you who watch my month with series, you'll know I say the following, which is the games make the console. Now, obviously, this is neither a console nor that consequential in terms of games. People didn't pick Windows 95 to play games on. Well, some people may have done, but it wasn't the main purpose for Windows 95 existing. It just happened to be a real turning point for games for the PC. It went from being a bit of a thing that you did, people would play on the Amiga or their consoles before they would pick a PC for a gaming platform. After Windows 95, of course, all of that changed. And there were loads of games, and I would encourage you to go and watch last week's video where I talk about the 10 most important games, I think, for Windows 95. The must-have games. Your views may differ, but I'm sure there'll be some games in there that you'll like. So in terms of what I've been playing this month, you should definitely go back and check that video out, because that will give a lot more detail about what the sort of games are that I've been playing and the sort of games I think you should definitely check out if you're thinking about going back and having a look at Windows 95. Now, it has not been plain sailing. So in the next section, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you how to get yourself set up for Windows 95, and then I'm going to tell you whether you actually should or not. And I will tell you a little bit about what the experience has been like for playing games. It has not been incredibly straightforward. That being said, all those videos in that top 10 there, I've had a go with all of those. So, we played a bit of Doom 95, and I've played a bit of Quake, and I've played all of the things in there because I needed to be able to record my video. But there's probably 3 games that I guess I've played the most, and those 3 games are Age of Empires, Diablo, and then probably Doom, actually. I probably played quite a bit of Doom in Doom 95. In fact, that was the first game that I played when I set it up. And actually, if you go and check out my video on setting up Windows 95, you'll see me playing Doom right back there. Also tried to play a little bit of X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. But again, when I get to the how has it been for the month, I'll tell you all about what happened with X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, because it's quite interesting in terms of putting some context around whether you should go back or not. So the 3 games that I've played, obviously I've talked about those. There are Diablo and Age of Empires and Doom, in fact, are all appear in the Bit Between. So please go check out my Bit Between videos on those for a little bit more of an in-depth dive into those 3 games. But those are the 3 that I've played the most. Age of Empires is probably my favourite out of all of those, whilst I've rated Diablo number 1 of games that, spoiler alert, probably supposed to say spoiler alert before you announce, but never mind. Diablo I rated very, very highly in my top 10 list, of course, but it's not my personal favourite game on Windows 95. That is probably going to be Age of Empires. I played a lot of that, really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's just such a great fun game to play, and you can just lose hours just clicking around, building little civilizations up, and sort of attacking the enemies and trying to sort of dominate. It is really good, and I quite like the scenarios in there, but I quite like just playing a vanilla game where you specify your own sort of setup, and I quite enjoy a game which I've mentioned before called Polytopia, which is sort of a modern take on Age of Empires, really, which you can play on your iPad or your iPhone or your Android device or whatever. That's quite a fun little game, and I played Polytopia, and I then had to go find Age of Empires because I just really enjoyed it. Mentioned Diablo, of course, which is just a fantastic game. My fear with playing too much Diablo is that I might end up losing hours and days to it, because it's an incredible game, and it's so good by 90s standards, and I think it still holds up really, really well in 2025. It just looks lovely. It plays really, really well. The concept of it is quite simple, actually. And of course it's spawned a fantastic franchise, which is still incredibly popular, and just a cultural favourite, a cult favourite, I guess, as well, even today. So Diablo was never a series of games that I really gave enough attention to. But I know there are some big fans out there, and whenever I go back and play any kind of Diablo game, I always do really enjoy it. So that was the other one. I mentioned Doom as well, which obviously I played loads, and I've talked a lot about Doom. Doom is just it just needs no introduction. It's just so playable even today. The graphics are getting on a bit now, but Doom is fantastic. Obviously originally a DOS game, but I played Doom 95, which is a Windows port, which allowed you better screen resolution, more colours, and obviously ability to configure it and set it up really, really quickly, as opposed to having to fiddle about with it in DOS a little bit. So a really fun game to go back and play. And as I mentioned, also played a bit of X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, but that has been quite limited. And as I've said, I'll tell you all about why that was a bit of a problem later on. But again, a game I absolutely adore. I loved it back in the day. I was really surprised when I was doing my research. It scored really, really well from a review perspective, but actually didn't sell all that well, which was actually really, really surprising to me. So I don't really know what happened there, but it is, I think, a title that deserves another look. And if the fact that it didn't sell so well might mean that a lot of you who are watching this never played it. So it's definitely worth going to check it out if you can manage to get it working. So there you go. Those were the games that I have been playing through this month. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go, and I'm just going to very briefly talk to you about how you can get back into Windows 95 gaming in 2025. So if you're interested in getting back into Windows 95, how do you do it? Well, this will be a very short section, because at the beginning of the month I did a video where I tell you how you can get yourself installed again with Windows 95, whether you've got a Mac, a modern Mac running Mac Silicon, or whether you've got a Windows PC running Windows 10 or 11 or whatever. There are some ways of getting Windows 95 up and running again on those platforms. So if you're interested in doing that, basically what they are is they are PC emulators, little sandbox PCs inside your PC or your Mac, and you can install Windows into it in quite a protected way, so you don't have to worry about it interfering with any of the rest of your operating system or breaking anything on your PC or your Mac. You just install it in this little sandbox and it will run quite happily in there without too much bother at all. So that really is all you need to know. So if you want to get back into Windows 95, the actual OS itself, then get yourself an emulator and go and install Windows 95 again. That's going to be the best way to do it. And all the instructions are in that video. It's quite long, but it's split into two parts. So if you've got a Mac, watch the second part. If you've got a PC, watch the first part. You don't need to watch the whole video. It will just hopefully tell you everything you need to know to get you moving. The only other way really to get yourself into Windows 95 gaming is to look for modern ports of the game. So sometimes you will find games that have been remade. And you'll find them on Steam. There are quite a lot, actually. The advantage is a lot of them are just being remastered and recompiled. Some of them have just been recompiled for newer versions of Windows. So things like Age of Empires, for instance, there have been releases of the Age of Empires games more recently. You can play X-Wing vs TIE Fighter as well. You can also go and find on, I think that's on Good Old Games, GOG.com. But there are lots of games that were out on Windows 95 that have been remastered and remade. Now, if there's a particular game that you want to play, before you go and install Windows 95 and try and play the original version of that game, I would definitely recommend going to see if there's a version that will run on a modern PC or Mac in Steam or on GOG.com, because that will give you a much, much better playing experience than trying to load up Windows 95 and get a game working actually in the native operating system. So I said this section will be short. That really is it. So those are your two options. Go find the games that you want to play. If it's a specific game you want to play, go find it on a store. If it's not in a store, then full details on my install video on how to get Windows 95 up and running again and have another go. But stay tuned for the next section, because it is a bit of a cautionary tale, and I will tell you all about that right now. What has it been like to live with Windows 95 for the last month, and would I recommend you doing it yourself? Would I recommend you going back and loading up Windows 95 and having another look around yourself? Okay, so many of you who know me know that I'm a bit of a console gamer, not really a PC gamer, but I like both. I have my ROG Ally and I do play a lot of PC games, and I have my Xbox as well. So, you know, back in the day, back in the 90s, I wasn't Microsoft's biggest fan. I think that is probably a bit of an understatement. But these days, you know, I have no beef. I have no beef with Microsoft. I use Windows a lot, and I have a lot of Microsoft-based devices, and there is a gaming PC in the house, and, you know, like, I'm cool with it. You know, we've come to terms with each other. Not that Microsoft even knows who I am, but we've come to terms with each other, and I am not somebody who has any particular malice towards Microsoft in this day and age. So you might decide you want to put a thumbs down on my video at that point if you don't agree with me, but that is how it is. However, Windows 95 at the time, and I talk about my memories of Windows 95 in one of my other videos as well, so go check that out for a little bit more detail. At the time, I didn't like Windows 95, particularly in the 90s when it came out, and that was more of a student hating the big corporate thing, you know, idealistic early 20-something type of person, more so than any specific reason. But there were problems with it. I did have issue with 95 in that there were a lot of reliability issues. It broke a lot. It was a nuisance. Plug and play didn't work properly. DirectX was flaky to start with. I didn't like Internet Explorer, all of those kind of things. But that's not really the point of this question. The point is, what was it like to go back and live with it in 2025? Well, the experience has been mixed, to say the least. The problem is not so much Windows 95 itself, but I think the fact that things have moved on so much. So when I take a console and I put it in the living room and I play that console, I plug it in, and I might have to do a bit of conversion to get it to work on the TV, but ultimately it's pretty straightforward, and I put the games in and they just work, and it's great. And that's fine. Windows 95 requires a lot more effort. So if you can't find the game that you want to play, if it's not in Steam or it's not on GOG.com and you want to go and set Windows 95 up, it is quite an involved process. So it's not a case of just finding an emulator for a console or just plugging a console into a TV. There's a lot more effort that needs to go into it. So that's the first problem, is it took me, although my video will tell you everything you need to do, for me to get to that point where I was able to tell you how to do it, took me hours and hours and hours of trial and error, fiddling about with things, trying to get drivers to work. It was a real nuisance. So that bit was quite hard. The second problem that I had, the biggest problem that I had really, is we live in an age which is fantastic really, where we have a few standards which are amazing. So we have USB, for instance, which is the most, obviously, one of the most well-known standards, and it's backwardly compatible and it works with everything, and it is the true embodiment of what Windows was trying to do back then with plug and play. You plug a USB device in, it just works, whether that is a printer or you know, some speakers or a video capture card or a controller or whatever it happens to be, it just works. It's very, very simple, and that's brilliant, and we are quite spoilt by that. Windows 95 didn't support USB, so that means when you're playing games, you're pretty limited on what you can actually do. I could not figure out, despite hunting the web up and down, trawling around all over the place, trying to find how to do it, I could not find a way of getting a joystick to work with a USB joystick or a gamepad to work with Windows 95. I just couldn't do it, which meant that X-Wing vs TIE Fighter was impossible through the Windows interface because I just couldn't get it to work. I had a real battle with it because I tried Windows 98, I had a similar problem. I tried Windows XP, and then I had problems reading the disk. It just wouldn't load the disk up. So I had a real battle trying to get that game to work through emulation. Through the Windows emulators, even with newer versions of Windows, I was really, really struggling with it. And in the end, I had to download, I paid £2.99 and I downloaded it from GOG.com. And if you look at the frame rate in my video that I did last week in my top 10, it's absolutely dreadful. And that's because that's how it plays. I played it on my ROG Ally X, which is a very, very capable machine, and it just ran like a dog. It was almost unplayable. Now, I'm sure with a bit of optimization, I'm sure I'd have been able to improve that, but it just wasn't great, and I had a lot of problems trying to get that to work, even though it was natively supported on Windows 11. So I did have a real battle with it. It was a real challenge. Now, it was quite satisfying getting Windows 95 finally up and running, and when I tried to install the USB updates on it, it basically completely broke the install and I had to start it again. So be very cautious about even trying to get USB support working on Windows. When you turn it on, it doesn't work, and then you get some file library error, and basically you have to repair your Windows install. It's a bit of a tricky thing. That also is part of the problem. You know, this is an old operating system, and it was prone to things like this where you could get yourself into a real bind with it and then have to start again, which is fine when you're running it in a sandbox on a modern PC. Back then, of course, you know, that was your PC, and you couldn't go out to the internet and find out how to fix things. They just broke, and you were like, okay, what do I do now? So, you know, it did bring back some of those memories of some of the pain that I went through of having to live with Windows 95 back then. It was not all roses. So it's been great to go back and have another look at it, and to click around and, you know, play solitaire on it, and have a look at, you know, have a look at it compared to Windows 3.1 and enjoy that nostalgia element of it. Would I recommend going back and having another look at it now? No, I definitely wouldn't. I mean, like I said, if you can find a game on a more modern version of Windows, definitely go play that. There's lots and lots of retro games on Xbox and, you know, in Steam and GOG, you know, where you can just go and find the remastered versions of the games. Just go do that. Honestly, just go do that, because you'll set Windows 95 up. You might run into problems that I didn't run into. Even little things like, for instance, Windows 95 doesn't support modern CPUs, so you had to run the Windows fixed 95 CPU just to allow it to run, because it just couldn't cope with the speed of the processors that we've got in today's computers. So it's an operating system which was incredibly important, and it was a real turning point for PC ownership and for gaming, and its importance should not be understated. But in this particular instance, and I don't see this very often, Windows 95 probably best left in the past. I think it's had its day. There are much better versions of Windows nowadays, and a lot of the games that you played back then, you can generally find them and play them in other ways on more modern platforms. But if you do want to go back and have another look, it is a great walk down memory lane. It is great to go back and have a look at the extras on the CD, or fiddle about with some of those screensavers with the Plus Pack. So I have enjoyed it. But it has also been incredibly frustrating, and it has limited what I've been able to play. Only really been able to play the sorts of Age of Empires type game. Anything that you can click around and control with a keyboard or a mouse is all I've really been able to play on Windows 95. So it has been quite limited. So yes, that is my suggestion. My suggestion is don't do it unless you really want to. If you do want to, go check out my videos on how to get it installed. It might just be something you just go and have a bit of nostalgia for, and then leave it there. But yeah, so that's it for this month. So let's just go through my final thoughts now, and I'm going to reveal to you what my console is going to be for October. So there you go, that was Windows 95 a month with. Very much a mixed bag. I've enjoyed the nostalgia. I've enjoyed going back to the 90s and remembering all those events and the hype that surrounded it, and going back and looking at just how different Windows 95 was compared to 3.1, just how much of a quantum leap it was in terms of gaming and computing, and PC gaming in particular back in the day. And I think, you know, as I've said throughout the video and all the other videos that I've made, its impact was huge and still continues to be felt even today as well. So it was very important. But in reality, probably something that was maybe remembered. If you remember it fondly, leave it there. Remember it fondly. Don't necessarily feel the need to go back and check it out again. It is very tricky to get back into, and it is fraught with problems and limitations and issues and everything else. So it's been an interesting month, and I've enjoyed doing a month with an OS as opposed to a console, having a bit of a break. Yeah, that is it. So talking of next month with some consoles and everything else, what is going to be the console for October? So for the eagle-eyed few of you who may have been just perhaps on the odd occasion getting a flash of what's been going on the screen behind me, you've probably already figured it out. I've dropped a few hints here and there as to what it might be. Now, this is a console that I have not owned until more recently, and it's not a console that I actually knew anybody else who owned either. And that console is the wondrous Nintendo 64 from the mid-90s. And like I say, not a console I actually owned. This console, which I bought only a couple of years ago, is the first Nintendo 64 that I've ever owned. And like I said, I never really played on it very much. So for me, this month with is going to be really interesting, because it's going to be, a lot of this is going to be first timer for me. Now, I've played a few games on the N64 out and about, a few games that I'm aware of, a few games that I've emulated. So I've played GoldenEye because everybody's played GoldenEye. Played a bit of Mario 64, played a bit of Mario Kart 64, played a bit of Donkey Kong. But I haven't played on it loads. So it's going to be really interesting to see what it's like in 1995. It's on the brain. In 2025, through the eyes of someone that's not so familiar with it. Now, I had a GameCube, and obviously I did a month with the GameCube before, and I absolutely loved the GameCube. Obviously, this came before the GameCube, so I am a big Nintendo fan. I just didn't really get to it. The GameCube was really my first proper foray into Nintendo gaming, so quite late for me, really. But yeah, the N64, out of all the consoles I own, is probably the one that I've played on the least. So it's going to be an interesting voyage of discovery for me, going back and playing some of these games. So this will actually be going in the living room, as my other consoles normally do, and I'm going to be getting on and playing this throughout the month. So yes, that is it. Nintendo 64 for October with this wonderful bright yellow controller. I've got another one knocking around somewhere. I also have the Nintendo 64 controller for the Switch as well, so I'll be getting that set up because that'll make life a little bit easier from a TV gaming point of view. And there'll also be some games on there that I haven't got loads and loads of games for the Nintendo 64, so I might have to pick a few up, but I have got enough certainly to do a month with. And some of the things I'm going to be looking at, I want to have a look at GoldenEye, because that's largely considered the best game ever made. So I want to go back and have a look at that through 2025 eyes. As someone that's not played it a huge amount, I've played it a bit, but someone that's not played it a huge amount, and determine whether I think that is a fair assessment, and whether that still holds up in 2025. So I'm going to have a look at that, and then we'll just see how we go. And obviously keep an eye on the bit between as well. I'll be probably playing a few N64 games on my midweek mini reviews as well. So there you go, that's the N64 coming up through October. Now, what other things coming up in the channel? Well, I've mentioned it a few times now. I'm going to be up to Blackpool, and we're talking about well, tomorrow. So obviously you can probably gather I record these videos slightly in advance, so I'm just trying to figure out when this goes out. But yeah, I'll be up to Blackpool tomorrow. So I'm very, very excited about that, and that's the Play Expo. So I'm not sure what to expect from that. So there will be a video on that very, very shortly. A road trip. I haven't done one for a little while. Obviously, I mentioned that we've got some N64 stuff coming up, and I have also got Ridge Racer coming up for my PS1 monthly racer, which I'm also really looking forward to, although I'm probably going to set that up for a fail, because I used to be quite good at Ridge Racer, but I haven't played it for a long time, so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Did play it on the PSP recently, so maybe that will help, but yeah, that's going to be somewhat of a voyage of discovery as well. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you've enjoyed this month with Windows 95. It's been a bit different, and hope you enjoyed this review of it. Go check out my other Windows 95 videos for more information, so setting up or my memories or the top 10 games. But yeah, other than that, that's it for September's month with and Windows 95. If you do enjoy these videos, please do hit like and subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. Other than that, thank you ever so much for watching. Do take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.